First of all, thank you very much to the organizers for having me. I've really enjoyed the conference so far. I learned quite a bit, and I think it's great that you're doing something like this. So I'm really glad you have the Hayek Center and whatever other centers you need to do this. So today I will be talking about Sweden. Yet again, technicality. So Sweden is becoming very popular here. It's usually Italy, but okay, this time it's Sweden. And I want to just give you a little bit of background. I've been working for a while now, on and off, because I switch every 2 minutes on cultural change. So not so much, I've been working on culture, and then I switched now to working on cultural change. And in fact, I'm just putting the finishing touches on a handbook chapter called Understanding Cultural Change. So I'm very interested in that topic. And if anybody has papers, they should send it to me as soon as possible, because it's due like a week after I get back home. So I would need to incorporate it. But I see this paper as being in that line. And the other thing I want to say is that this is going to be unlike the other papers you've seen. Well, maybe one or two of them had it, but it didn't stress it. This is going to be a structural paper. So I'm not necessarily structured. In other words, I believe that the best evidence comes from reduced form. But I think that there's a lot of questions that you can't ask if you're only going to stick to reduced form. And so the type of question that I'm going to want to ask in this paper with my co-authors, who you see here, and the person I want to stress is Jiwon Lee, who is a graduate student at NYU, who is going to the job market this year. And I know everybody says their students are excellent, but she really is excellent. And she did really the computational part of this paper, which is not trivial. So yeah. Okay, so I think that's all I want to say just by general introduction. So now let me start. So, okay.
Give it pointer as well.
Yeah, maybe I just.
But I think if you move that little window around, you might have to click on slide.
Okay, so let me click on this slide. Yeah, and now it's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so. As you all know, we're interested in increasing gender equality. And when you look at countries across the world, Sweden always really ranks way up there in terms of its gender equality is measured in a variety of ways. But as in any other country that has parental leave remains very unequally distributed in terms of its take-up by gender. It's not to say that there hasn't been progress in Sweden. In 1974, men took a 0.5% share of the parental leave allocation, and now today, they take about 30%. So there's definitely increased, but it's still far from 50%. And one might want to ask what would be needed in order for men to take a greater share of parental leave. And of course, for that, you kind of need to understand what is the mechanisms that makes them change the amount of parental leave in the first place. So the objective of this paper was to use a reform in 2002 in Sweden, and I'll go over it very soon, to try to understand a bit more of the mechanisms that led to change in Sweden, and to use the estimated model to then think about alternative policies. There's two reforms in Sweden that matter. First, let me just say that I'm going to give you a bit of institutional background, not that much, given I have an hour. The basically current leave system, more or less, was introduced in 1974. Prior to that, there was maternity leave. Now there is no, as of 1974, it became parental leave. So it does not distinguish between men and women. It's the first country to do this. And by 1994, there was a year of high replacement earnings related benefits that individuals could take a parental leave, either in the man or the woman, divided any way that they wish to, and an additional 3 months of very low paid leave. This system has remained more or less the same, except for a few important reforms. The first one is known by the name of the Daddy Month, and it was introduced in 1995. And although it says daddy, it's not for the man. They earmarked a month for the woman, a non-transferable month for the woman, and a non-transferable month for the man. And then the remaining months could be taken by anyone who wanted to take them. But what this meant is that if the man did not take that month that belonged to him and him alone, that month was lost. Okay, and this was one of the high earnings replacement months. Okay, similarly, the woman didn't take it, that month was lost. Okay, so there was 1 month that belonged to each, and there's quite a few papers that show that this increased men's share of parental leave. Now, in 2002, and this is the reform I'm going to be studying here, this was increased to 2 months of parental leave that became non-transferable between each parent, and parental leave was increased to 13 months, which means that before the maximum a woman could take was 11 months, because 1 month belonged to the man. Now the maximum that a woman can take is still 11 months, because now 2 months belong to the man, but it increased to 13.
So just out of curiosity, it's interesting that they started this in the first place. Do we know much about what gave them the idea in the first place to start doing this?
They were interested in gender equality. It's very explicit that they want to get men more involved in care work. And the idea was, let's incentivize this by kind of making it costly for a man not to take any time at all.
It was like one party. So I think, I mean, the one big question is, how did Sweden become Sweden? Now, if you look at 1940, they were as patriarchal as anybody else. So I'm just wondering if you have some view of what made them want to achieve.
No, and I think that's an interesting question, but it's beyond the scope of this paper. How did Sweden become Sweden? But it was a very explicit argument, okay? So this is not to convince you of anything, it's just to show you that you can see between, this is the share of gross, and I'll explain what that means, parental leave days, taking within the first 2 days after 2 years after childbirth, and you can see between 2001 and 2002, you see a sharp increase. But this is not really supposed to try to convince you of any particular thing. Okay, so what does our paper do? We wanted to use the reform to understand the quantitative contributions that came from the changes in parental leave, which I will show you in a few seconds, that came from 2 different sort of sets of motivators, drivers. One, which we will call economic incentives, which come from the fact that the opportunity set changes. Now there's 2 months that are lost rather than 1. And there's could be future wage consequences. That is, when you're taking parental leave and you're a man and you're taking a certain amount of time, you might be signaling something about the type of man that you are in terms of being an employee by the amount of time that you take. Similarly for women. And I'm going to talk about all of these in more detail. And then the second factor being changes in culture or social norms. And for here, we're going to be thinking about choices made by peers. And then we're going to use the paper to look at alternative policies, use a model. So there's an important literature here. I'm going to very quickly go through it, given the time constraints. There's a large and growing literature that looks at the consequences of parental leave, in particular, non-transferable months, on a whole set of outcomes, including children's health, education, fertility, women's labor supply, men's labor supply, marital stability. And I will not go into it. Then there's also a related literature that speaks more closely to the work that I'm doing, which has to do with sort of peer effects. And let me just really talk about, I think the most important paper here is the Dahl, Loken, and Mogstad paper of 2014 that looked at a 1993 reform in Norway, in which there was an earmarked month for men. And what they show is they look at men who had a child in a firm, so this is firm specific, 6 months before, versus a firm in which a man had a child 6 months before, versus a man who had a child in 6 months after the reform. And they asked, what's the effect on peers in the firm of having a man who took 6 months before relative to having a man who took 6 months later? And they're always 1-on-1. So they restrict themselves to firms that have one man and one woman. And what they show is that there is a spillover in the sense that, of course, the reform had an effect on everyone, but in those firms in which a man was taking leave 6 months or was entitled to leave 6 months after relative to 6 months before, you see a larger increase in parental leave uptake by men. Here it's uptake, just 0, 1 variable, because basically most men were taking 0. And then they show that this snowballs. They could follow this for 5 years, appears, and they show that this snowballs over time. There's also literature that showed that couple conflict about sharing household work decreases as a result of this reform, again, making use of basically regressions, discontinuities for this. There are some nice papers that show that there's spillovers to the next generation. Particularly Farre and co-authors show for the case of Spain that in 2007 extended its leave for fathers by 13 days. You see, again, looking at the cohort, children born a few months before relative to children born a few months after. The children born a few months after have more gender equal attitudes. So they did this survey in high schools and showed that, so I thought that was really nice. And there's this very small structural literature that looks at the within couple allocation of parental leave. Okay. Enough literature. Now I'm going to talk about our paper. So again, we use a variety of data sets. This is Sweden. I'll just tell you quickly. We use a parental leave register to figure out leaves, the multi-generation register to figure out births and link them to leaves, the LISA database, which gives us education and the country of birth of parents, and wage structure statistics that gives us full-time equivalent monthly earnings. It's important to understand this is not your favorite Scandinavian country that has all the data. This is has all wage data for public sector employees, but it only has a stratified and therefore representative data set of 50% of the private sector. It includes all large firms and then stratified on smaller firms by size and sector. Okay, so it's about I'm going to say more or less 50% of the private sector. Okay, we're going to study this 2002 reform. And I'm going to be talking about 2 periods, a pre-reform period, which is not going to be a year. This is no regression discontinuity, so get that out of your head. It's going to be 1998 to 2001. That's to make sure we have enough data, and I'll be clear why in a second. And we're going to call that the pre-reform period. And then a post-reform period, which you might think would be 2002, but it's not, because we want to let time for culture to change, and that's not going to happen immediately. So we look at several years later, and we look at 2008 to 2011. Right. And again, I'll be clear about everything. We're going to restrict the sample of people that we look at to Swedish-born parents. We do not want to mix up the question of people with potentially rather different cultures because they came from different countries. So it's going to be Swedish-born parents, and it's going to be restricted to people who have their first birth, so as not to mix up questions of equity among children. Like if I spent X number of months with my first child, maybe I feel I should spend X number of months with my second child. The people are going to be between the ages of 20 and 60. It's going to be heterosexual couples because we're interested in gender roles. And I already told you the 2 periods that we're looking at. For what we're doing, we're going to build 2 samples. One, which is a larger sample, which we call the wage sample, which we use to estimate what is the wage penalty from taking different lengths of parental leave. For that, we need people who have wage data. And I should say this is full-time equivalent wage data in T-1, where T is the year that you had your child. So a year before having your child. And then we're looking at you 3 years later. So that's the criteria for being in the wage data. You should be there T-1 and 3 years after having your child. Okay. So we want to ask, is there some sort of consequence to how much months you've taken of parental leave? And you can see the sample size. And then we're going to have something which we call the couple sample, which we're going to, of these people for which we have the wage data, we have to make sure that we have the man and the woman. Why? Because this is, how much months do you take has an implication for how much months your partner can take. And so it's important to get both. And I'll talk more about that one later. We restrict our attention to parental leave spells that occur in the first 16 months after birth. Let me be clear, you can take parental leave anytime in the first 8 years. The vast majority of leave is taken in the first 2 years of birth. So there's studies that show this after birth. So that's really when it takes. A lot of times, otherwise, parental leave, particularly by the man, is used to have larger, longer summer vacations or longer winter break. So we didn't want to mix that up. Why 16 months? We didn't want to get into a birth of the second child too much and have that kind of interrupt things. So that was a decision. I'm not sure it was the best decision, but that's a decision that we made. The other thing you should know is that the length of parental leave registered can be, I'm taking a half day, I'm taking a full day. You don't know if they're taking a half day, for example. You don't know if they're taking half a day and going to work the rest of the day. You don't know what they're doing. So we're going to be treating it as though you took the full day off, as though you're not working during that time period. This is simply a choice. We don't know what you're doing. We just felt it's going to be disruptive for the firm. So we're going to look at it that way. What does it mean in terms of your pay? It means that if you're taking a half day, you still have a half day that you can take somewhere, some other time. Okay. All right. The other thing you should know is that some women, you can take 2 months of parental leave before your child is born. It counts against you. It's still in your allotment, but you can take them before your child is born. Now, children do not come like this, they don't come necessarily when they're supposed to. So sometimes those 2 months can end up being 3 months, or 2.5 months, let's put it that way. And so even though we're looking at 16 months, we're going to see individuals who are taking 17 months or taking 18 months. And it's less than 1% or taking more than 17 months. So we're going to code anybody who's taking 17 months or more, maybe 18, as taking 17 months. Okay, that's a coding decision. And then we're going to distinguish by education. We're going to have 2 levels of education. Either you have gone to college. In Sweden, that's typically 3 years. So either you have at least 3 years of college or you don't. We'll call people who have at least 3 years of college university people. Okay, so that's that U, and the N means no, you don't. Okay, and why distinguish by education? It would be much simpler to just lump everybody together. And that's because education matters, and I'll just show you that in a variety of ways. I'll use it to introduce, first of all, how parental leave looked. So these are parental leave months, and this is a good moment to say that the way that we're coding things is that if you take 0 months, you're coded as 0 months. If you take 20 days, you're coded as a month. If you're taking a month and 10 days, you're coded as 2 months. So it's going to exaggerate for everyone how much they're taking. Again, I'm not sure that's the best decision, but that's what we did for this. So that's how people are coded, and that's how you should be reading that. And when it comes to our model, we're allowing people to choose how many months they take, which then makes it a discrete choice model. Okay, and here I'm showing you in green the pre-period, in white the post-period, where these are just averages over the particular years. And what you can see right away, these are fathers who don't have a university, who are non-university. You see a movement. You see that everyone, that even though where there was one daddy month, zero really means zero. There was an important fraction of men, around 25% say, that were taking 0 months if they did not have a university degree. And what you see is furthermore, is that it's not just that the zeros and the ones shift to taking 2, you see movements across the entire distribution, okay? And you here just to show you the means and how they change from the pre to the post. This is the same thing. Fewer men are taking 0. And again, you have movement across the entire distribution. This is now women who don't have university, they decrease. Remember, they still had 11 months. They could have chosen to take 11 months. There was nothing in this reform that would have forced them to take less than 11 months if they wanted to. But you see movement across the entire distribution, and the same for university women. The important thing to note is that university women take less months in the pre-period than non-university women. They end up taking less months in the post-period than university women, and men who are university end up taking quite a bit more in the post-period, and you can see the difference between pre and post. You can see how they differ from non-university. This is just plotting all the information all over again, and I see, as usual, I'm going far too slow. So this is the same information all over again, just from the point of view of the man's education, in which I'm just giving you the shares and how the shares change in the pre to post period, according to whether the father had was non-university or university. And you can see there's an important increase in the share that's done by men.
And so do you have information on those that shift from 0 to what number of months they shift? So,
Remember, okay, so let me just be extremely clear here. These are not the same men. So if I wasn't clear, that's not good. So each time I'm taking, for each year in the pre and for each year in the post, I'm taking first-time fathers and mothers.
Okay.
So, yeah, so they wouldn't show up in the post, okay? Okay, so I can't say who shifts, and all I can tell you is that the distributions for sure shifts and the mean of this distribution shift. I just showed you education matters. I'm going to make that case even more when it comes to opinions. This is the only time I'm going to use poll data because unfortunately, we couldn't find anything except for 2002, which is the year of the reform, and then quite a year after our post period, which is 2012. So women, if you ask, does family life suffer if a woman works full time, for example, this is just to give you an idea of gender attitudes. In Sweden, in the pre-period, basically people agreed with that statement, the majority. These numbers here are the percent of people with this amount of college who just agreed with the statement. You can see there's important differences between college and non-college women in the pre-period, and that this changes in the post-period, but there's still an important gap between university and non-university women. Similarly for men, men always disagree far less than women do, and far less than women with their same education. But there's still, again, a gap between university and non-university, both in the pre-period and in the post-period. And in the post-period, everybody goes up regardless of education. Right, so just, again, I'm telling you education matters. But if I tell you education matters, unfortunately, it means I have 4 types of couples. Because if I have to worry about the woman's education and the man's education, it means I have to worry about the couple's education. So over here, and from now on, you're going to be seeing everything about couples. So now we can turn to the couple sample. It's going to be, there's 4 types of couples. Here is the man education first, non-university and non-university. Non-university, university, you can read this. This is for men and this is for women. And this is the means in terms of parental leave in the pre-period, and these are their means in the post-period. Okay, basically I'm generalizing a little bit. Men go up by about a bit over a month in terms of their means, and women go down by less than a month in terms of their means. So this is what happens to the population.
So you said, first go the men or the women?
We're up to me, but we started it and Peter, I'm getting confused. So we have the man first. It was not worth being confused. So it's N is the man, and then yeah, the first is the man, the first is the woman, regardless of which one I'm talking about.
So most of the mass is probably on the assortative matching couples, or how many are non-assortative, NU and UN?
There is a fraction. I used to have an arrow thing I would click there. I don't have it anymore. There's actually an important increase between these two periods in how much education Swedish women have. So a lot of them become much more UU couples. Basically, they start out, I think, with a little bit less. It will never matter to me, because everything I do is going to be at the couple level. Okay, yeah, but I shouldn't have taken that arrow. Okay. We're still we're nowhere near yet the model yet. So far I've showed you means, parental leave, education, etc. Now I want to talk about the other potential economic penalty when you take parental leave, and that is you might be signaling something. So we do not write an explicit signaling model here. We just look for it in the data. If I had to defend perfect causality here, I'd be in trouble. So I'm not going to try to defend it. I'm just going to tell you what you did, and you can tell me how convincing you find it. As I said, we're going to look at your wage 3 years after your child was born. So now this is panel data set. Okay, so it's the same individual. And a year before your child was born, this is log difference. The difference of logs. And we're going to regress it on, we're going to do this by gender and by education. So we're going to do this 4 times. Okay. And, there's a constant term and then a categorical variable that says you took 0 months, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. And what we're interested in are these betas that tell you what happens to your wage difference as a function of the number of months that you've taken. People have different ages when they have their first kids. So there is age. We know age matters to the profile of your wages. There's a whole year, beta year fixed effect. Okay, because in the pre-period we have 4 years, in the post-period we have 4 years, and that's all I want to say about this. So that's what we're estimating. I do not want to get stuck here too much. I'm going to show you pictures. Okay, I'm going to show you the estimate of this. So here are wage penalties estimate for men. The omitted category here is 0 months. So you should be reading all of these as with respect to 0 months of parental leave. And as you can see, the data is noisy. We're using our couples estimate. The data is noisy, but you can basically see that there is, as you take more months, you suffer a larger penalty. And that penalty for non-university men exists after taking 0 months. So people who take 1 month suffer a penalty. This is the same men, not the same men. It's the same education of men in the post period. And basically you can see that this has decreased.
It looks a bit like the penalty is minimized, roughly in the mean of the distribution, right? Because they used to take only like 2 months or so, 2 or 3,
Yeah.
4.
But they are suffering a penalty with respect to 0.
Right.
I mean, you would be best off taking 0.
Yeah.
This is all, you should be reading this as you suffer a 2-point-something% decrease in your wage increase 3 years later. Okay. Yeah, so that's what I need to say there. This is Fathers University. I want to go faster. I'm going very slow. Fathers University, they do not suffer a wage penalty in the first 3 months. Their wage penalty comes basically after that mean, which is about 2-point-something, comes after that. And then you can see how their wage penalties and their wage penalties also decrease. Okay. This is the same thing for mothers. I feel fairly comfortable about men. I don't feel that comfortable about women, and I'll tell you why. This is if you referee my paper and you say, oh, this paper has this problem, you're in big trouble. Actually, I pointed out. It's okay. Okay, this is a mother's non-university. The omitted variable here is 10 months. Because there's very little mass of people who take less than 10 months of parental leave in Sweden. So you can see that as of basically 12 months, there's a penalty and it increases as it goes on. You can see that it got smaller in the post period. That bothered me. Why? Because I thought, well, women should be taking less leave if anything, and now it's more of a signal that you're not so dedicated to your job if you take longer leave. So I expected this to go down. So how do I explain this finding? What I'm looking at here is full-time equivalent pay, because that's what the statistic gives me. That's what I can find. These are full-time equivalent pay. And what happens during this time period is women do less part-time work, which we know pays less. Women go less to the public sector, which is one thing that they used to do, that also because it has more flexible hours. And they also are far less likely to switch employers. Why am I bringing that up? Because, you know, Claven's Denmark thing, what he finds is that part of the wage penalty is explained by women going into more flexible work. Note, this is not Claven. These are all women who work. Okay, so they have to be working. The vast majority of women are working 3 years later. Well, that's not the issue. But that's my explanation for why it's, you know, it's gone up. It's because they're doing different types of jobs, but it doesn't matter. I'm just showing you the results.
I'm confused about the basics. So
Yeah.
they're all having lower wages compared to somebody who takes even longer leave? Is that what it says? So zero?
No.
10 months?
Yeah, so compared to someone who's taking 10 months
Yeah.
of leave, if you take, I don't know, 14 months of leave,
Oh,
you're
okay.
getting
I see.
about a
It's 10
1%
plus.
penalty.
Okay, no,
It's
okay.
10 plus 1.
Because nobody takes less.
Peter's not here, so I can blame him. I can't get him to put a 10, 11, 12.
Right. Then I would have appreciated that.
I would have appreciated it too.
Yeah.
Let's both talk to him, okay? Yes, I agree with you, but this is what it is,
Right.
okay? Yes.
I was wondering what you think of an alternative sort of cultural explanation, perhaps that there might be a norm shift and maybe quite a rapid norm shift. If you have a push as a policymaker and change very explicitly how many months men and women can take.
Oh, it's all about culture, my paper, yes.
But that could also explain why the signaling sort of penalty in the post might not be larger because the norms shift.
Yeah, but
That's
the
probably-
norm should shift to women taking less and men taking more. So if you, as a woman, have more of an opportunity to signal, that's why this bothers me. If it doesn't bother you, it's so much better, okay? Really so much better. Of course, it bothers me a lot. And so that's why I did all these checks. Are they moving less to part-time? Yes. Are they moving less to the public sector? Yes. Are they moving less to other firms? Yes. So that's why we did all those checks, because I want to understand what's going on. Doesn't matter. All that information, we're going to put it into intervals where things look statistically the same. So as to not differentiate, that's this. You don't have to look at it. It's the same information as there. Okay, except now I'm respecting the fact that we can't tell the difference between taking 2 months and 3 months. The penalty looks the same. Okay. So all this is now go to the model, and I want to say, okay, so I'm really writing down the simplest model I can think of to think about culture and economic incentives in the model of parental leave. But I did want the model, or we did want the model to incorporate 4 factors that we think are important. One is just the fact that household and decisions interact, okay? Obviously, if I take more of the highly paid months, at some point, you have to take less of the highly paid months. So that's one thing. So we have to look at the couple. 2, there's going to be economic consequences, or there could be economic consequences of parental leave. We looked at the future wage penalties. Those are going to be data that we feed into the model. There's I'm going to say, look, you can take 1 month, 2 months, 3. This is how your wages are going to suffer. That's data, and they can choose what they want to do. But there's also unpaid parental leave months. I shouldn't call them unpaid. They're low paid parental leave months. These low paid parental leave months paid about $9 for the day when it was in the pre-period, and a bit more like $12. And I'm putting everything in dollars in the post-period. So we're in the terms of the model, we're going to put that to 0. Doesn't really matter. You could put 9 and 12. I just thought, okay, let's just put it to 0 as 0 importance. Okay. So all I'm saying is, in addition to those 13 months that the couple can take, there are low paid months, and there's 3 of them, which is why you're seeing mass on the right.
Do firms sometimes top up the low paid months?
Yes, and that's going to be here. Yes. Then what else? There could be a desire, positive or negative. You don't have to want to. to spend time with the child, but we better incorporate that. And lastly, there's the effect of culture, changing cultural norms. So those are the four things I wanted to get into the model, and you can tell me what you think. So we assume the unitary household. I honestly think bargaining is exaggerated. Don't get mad at me, Matthias. Bargaining is exaggerated in terms of its importance for the household, but we do have a unitary household.
I often do. Yeah.
Okay. That's good. So we have a unitary household. We could do this with bargaining. Nothing's really going to change. It's going to be one more parameter to estimate, which is bargaining strength, and then how it changes. And then it's going to be by household type, et cetera. So we can introduce that. So we assume a unitary household. As we said, their households are distinguished by the education of each spouse, giving rise to 4 types of household. And what do they care about? I put it all in one utility function here. And they're going to care about, and I'll explain each term in length in 2 minutes, their average monthly income during the period of parental leave, these 17 months that we're looking at, okay? Then there's the coefficient, and they care about the average, the same utility function, their average household income as of year T+3 in terms of the data. Think of it as future income. We would like that wages that you get at T+3 to be a proxy for future income. Then comes the child part. Let's look at math for a second. It has an intensive and extensive part, an extensive part. So let's look at this part first. This simply says you have a utility function that differs by your gender potentially and by your education potentially. Over the amount of time, how many months you're spending. So if you were thinking of, say, of a concave function, you would have decreasing marginal utility from an additional month of leave if it were concave. Or not obviously the opposite if it were convex. That's this part. Same thing for women, differs by education and gender. The other thing that exists is this coefficient gamma. This coefficient gamma is where culture is going to come in and where differences across individuals, it's going to be another source of heterogeneity. What is this? This is going to be a draw from a normal distribution. Those parameters are going to depend on the actions of your peers. So let me see if I have that equation. So let me take a pause and explain that perfectly well, because this is what will introduce the second equation in the model. 2 equations. So the gamma is going to be an individual draw from a mean, from a normal distribution with some mean and some standard deviation. The standard deviation is a function of gender and education. The mean of that distribution is an endogenous variable. And in particular, it's assumed to be a linear function of the average amount of leave that people like you took. So what do I mean by people like you? People like, if I'm a woman, obviously it's other women. If I'm college educated, it's people who are college educated. But not only that, it matters who my spouse is. Because it's true, I'm going to work with people mostly with my education, but when it comes to socializing, I'm also going to be socializing with the friends of my spouse. And when I say spouse, these are not married people. It's going to be, friends of my partner. So his education is also going to. So in particular, if I'm a university woman married to and again, just get rid of the word marriage, married to a university man, I'm going to care about what women, university women married to university men are doing. Okay? These are not household type specific, but they are gender and education specific. And this, the endogenous variable, does depend, that's going to be moving endogenously, and it's going to depend on my household type, what that value is, but not the coefficients, okay? So how are we modeling culture? We're modeling culture as how much pleasure, in some sense, you get from taking leave, how much was you getting from taking leave, and we're letting that amount of happiness or unhappiness that you get from leave to be evolving over time with decisions done one period before. Why one period before? Just to get rid of multiple elective periods. So, normally I would just have gone like this and then we would have this whole multiplicity discussion. So let's not have the multiplicity discussion and let's do that. Okay? What I'm going to be doing, and so here's where the macro part comes in. If you were macroeconomist, you would have no problem with what I'm doing, but you probably will. I'm going to assume that in the pre-period, we're in a steady state. And in the post-period, we're in a new steady state. Otherwise, I have no ability to discipline what I'm going to try to manage. So there's going to be two steady states, one pre, one post. What does it mean that we're in a steady state? This means that this doesn't change anymore. Okay, that whatever T it was, T bar was at S is the same as T bar S minus one. Is that, yes.
The two education groups are really totally separate here, right? Is there something that links them together, or that they both play their own thing somehow?
Here they're completely separate in the sense that I'm allowing the parameters to depend on your education and on your gender. And they're also separate in that if I'm a university woman, I'm caring about what university women married to university men do. I don't think this is a particular important assumption. We could try also just doing, suppose I'm a university woman and I don't care about their spouses. I just care what other university women do.
It's interesting because the difference is so big, between those two, and you kind of, it would be nice to also have some view on where that comes from, or kind of how it's sustained, that the two groups have something.
I mean, it could be, but this is not that type of paper, right? So, it is different, but it's not like it's 4 months of difference. It's a month of difference, just to be very clear. Okay. So they all tend to be taking 12 months of leave. So they're going past the paid months. Okay, great. What else do I want to tell you? I forgot to tell you about the childcare costs. So childcare in Sweden is very cheap, publicly subsidized. I should say, just for those of you who are not understanding the European system, the leave is not paid for by your employer. It's paid for by the state. Okay, means you're paying for it via taxes, but it's paid for by the state. But your employer does not per se care about it, except that it's disruptive, perhaps. It is not cheap to get childcare before your child turns 1 year old. So you have publicly provided childcare when your child turns 1, which means that if both you and your spouse want to take fewer than 12 months, you're going to be paying more expensive childcare. So I guess I'm going to now I am of course way behind where I would like to be. So I've told you this, let me just tell you a little bit more about functional forms. So I'm going to assume a functional forms. CRA utility functions, okay, for consumption. This is how you care about your income both during parental leave and after. And CRA over the number of months that you're taking, that part where it's not the gamma part. Okay. What else do I want to tell you? I want to give you an example and then I'll go really quickly. This is not your typical couple. Couples do not take 11 months. They take more than this, okay, on average. But this one will illustrate everything that's going on in the model. I want to tell you what average income is during the parental leave period. So this is average household income. There's 17 months, so I'm multiplying the average by 17 to get a total. And you're going to have, if the man is taking TM months of leave, he's getting full pay of WM for those remaining months, 17 minus TM. Similarly for the woman, she's getting paid fully for those months that she is working and not in parental leave. Then there's a replacement rate kappa for those months, and it's the same kappa for men and women, for those months in which they are on parental leave. We're going to place this at 0.85. It's varied a bit. If you belong to a union, the union tends to have a higher one. Private employers can chop it up. I'm going to tell you this really doesn't matter if it's 0.85, 0.8, or 0.9. Let's just pick it as 0.85. Here, this part we're going to redo just to have exact numbers. Right now, just take it as a leap of faith. We put the private cost of childcare to be 60% of a non-college woman's monthly wage. And the private cost of, but I did the opposite. This is the private cost, this is the public cost, it's 10 times less, it's 6% of so you still have to pay fees when you go for public childcare, it's gonna be 6%. Okay, so this couple, is in addition to getting tapped up, because they only took 11 months, has to pay 1 month of private childcare and 5 months of public childcare. And that's what you do. Then you divide by 17 and you get the average monthly income during the parental leave. So that was just to show you that. Okay, I'm going to not have any time, I'm going to do it very quickly, but please stop me anyway. I think this is very straightforward. What about couples? Yes.
Sorry, just
Yeah, literally.
Does it matter? Like here, you're assuming you have to consume your income every period, but I would think university people can kind of smooth their income better.
Yeah, but here I'm not going to, I didn't want to do a savings model.
Okay.
Yeah, because then we would have to match that data and we didn't do that. So we're going to assume couples draw log wages from a household bivariate normal distribution. The mean, the variance, and how correlated wages are all taken from the data by household type. So we look at UU couples and we look at their means for men, the mean for women, the standard deviation of each, and how correlated they are, and then we take draws. We're going to normalize wages, that doesn't really matter. We look at the growth in wages. I'm not going to go over that because that was just using that same equation as before. I'm not going to describe the parameters. I'm going to tell you what we match. So we are going to estimate 18 parameters. That's what the model has to match 52 moments. There are going to be pre and post period moments. The only way to get culture, to think about culture, is to have also the post period. So what are they? Very quickly. Their mean months of parental leave by gender and household type, that gives me 8. The fact that they're pre and post means I multiply by 2. So that gives me 16. Same for the standard deviation. I think it's important for the model to match the percentage of men who took 0 months, because that's saying something strong about preferences there. We're going to do this by household type, pre and post. That's 4 times 2. That's another 8 there. The mean household share of leave taken by men by household type. Again, that's 4 times 2. And then a very important variable, which we only put in a bit late when we were doing this, and we realized how important it was, which is how correlated is the wage ratio of men to women within a household type, so say UU couples, and how much leave a woman takes. It turns out this number is very low. If you would like to put TM here, that number is very low. If you would like to put TF over TM plus TF, that number is very low. There is very little correlation between wage differences or wage ratios within a household, given their household type, and how much leave is being distributed. That's a really important fact conceptually, but also numerically, because it tells you that maybe economics is not going to be playing such a strong role, because if it were, they should be responding quite a bit more to this. Yes.
The wage penalties, the wage penalties earlier, are they part of the estimation too? I'm trying
We
to-
estimated all the wage penalty.
So the wages, so the change in the wage penalty from before and after.
Yeah.
It's just in the wage process. That you feed it.
Oh, okay. No. We changed it. So the wage penalties, pre and post,
Yeah.
are exogenously given.
Yeah.
They're data that are fed to people.
Okay. Because I thought you would say that part of the culture is that the work culture changes and somehow because everybody.
I think it does, but I don't think it's necessarily the employer who gives a damn about your, more polite, about your work culture.
Right.
I think it's your employer saying the ability to signal has changed because people are taking more or less. And that's one of the reasons we're also looking several years later, because it takes time for this, what people do in the workplace, to matter to wage penalty.
But for the model, it's just an input that's
For
gonna.
the
take-
model, it's an input. There's
Yeah.
not a signaling model behind this. If you wanted to write down a more complicated model, you write down a signaling model. We're just going to take it as data and you're going to decide what you want to do. Okay, and so yes, so what are we feeding in? We're feeding in people get a draw of wages. that wage draw is different in pre-period than in post-period. Remember, these are not the same people because all the parameters have changed. The correlation, by the way, barely changes of how correlated men and women are by household type and the wages. But the mean changes, standard deviation changes, they take a different draw, they have different wage penalties. So when I'm talking about economics, that's what I mean, that all those things have changed. Okay, and I'm gonna take seriously that time, which means that.
We've got 10 minutes.
No, yeah, I know, but so I can come back to all of this. I usually would like to interpret the parameters. I think people who do structural do not do enough interpretation. I'm just gonna say, no, I'm not gonna say, if I start to say, I won't finish. Our model does really well, given that there's 52 moments being matched by 18 parameters. And I don't know what you want to look at. You probably should, it's misleading to put them in parentheses. These are the standard deviations that we're trying to match. We do really a very good job, I think, in matching everything, except for the standard deviations, where we are always below. I can't explain why we're always below, but it seems that our model wants to match things. It wants less variance than what we're putting in terms of the gammas or whatever. But in any case, here it is. This is what we get. So it really does a good job. You can stare at whichever moment you want, the percent taking 0 months. The top panel is in the pre-period. The bottom panel is in the post-period. It's always by household type. And it's always, and that's a lot. And it's men versus women, men and women versus. Okay. It does, there's some on target here, always done cherry picking, so you can take this with, greater than. If you looked at the percentage of women taking 11 months or less, why is 11 months or less interesting? Because that's a maximum amount you could take and still be highly paid. We did not try to match those, and it does really well, or quite well in the pre-period. It does less well in the post-period, especially for university women. We did not try to match the correlation between the wage ratio and women's parental leave in the post-period, although we could have, and it also does a fairly good job of matching. I do want to tell you what that was. This correlation, as you can see, is between 0.05 and 0.09. So that's already giving you a very strong signal about the importance of economics. I'm not going to tell you, we do all sorts of parameter variation to try to think about where our identification is coming from. I won't tell you about that. And let me just go to the main thing. Okay. So remember, we're trying to understand mechanisms here. After all this, we're trying to understand what drives these decisions. So the first thing that we do, and I'm only showing you some moments just to be able to fit everything on the page. The first thing that we do is to say, well, here are our pre-reform simulated moments for mean leaves for men, women, and the percent of men taking 0 months. The first thing we do is to ask, if we had only had the reform and nothing else had changed, the means of those distributions remain frozen at what they were in the original steady state, and all wage parameters and wage penalties remain the same. As you can see, men would have increased their leave on average by, say, 0.2 of a month, so 1/5 of a month. And women would have slightly, actually leaves it on. Some of them decrease, some of them increase a bit, but it's barely any movement for women. So, but you do see some movement for men. Remember, we're going to get about a month increase overall. So this is getting 1/5 of that weight. The next thing that we do is we still keep the means of the distribution at the original steady state. In other words, culture is not allowed to change. And we ask, well, what if we change all those wage parameters to what they have to be in the post period? So wage penalties, wage means, variances, and correlations to what they are in the post period. What difference would it make to just only having the reform? And as you can see, basically, the shifts are ridiculously small. They're barely noticeable. This is telling you that the change that went on in wages, including those change in wage penalties, really did not do much. And in particular, another thing to point out, really the percentage of men who are taking 0 months along all these 3 columns, along these 2 separate columns, it's not changing from what it used to be. So those men have really strong preferences, whatever's going on, you give them the reforms, they say, no, thank you. Okay, and you change their wages, they say, so, no, thank you. Yes, the wage penalty is smaller, there's an additional amount, I'm not doing it. Next, we go back and we get rid of the wage changes. And we allow social norms to change endogenously. In other words, we don't put them like what they're going to be at the new steady state. We allow them, we solve for the steady state, assuming nothing had changed in wages, but the reform had been. We can think about this as a contribution on top of the reform of cultural change in that sense. And as you can see, now you get really large increases, always relative to 1 month, okay? But you get large increases in what men are taking. And you get some pretty large decreases in what women are doing. And for the first time, you see an important shift for every group of the percentage of the men who are taking 0 months. So when you allow preferences to change, the men who had very strong preferences about 0 months are now getting, just mechanically, they're getting a gamma from a different distribution, one with a higher mean. And the higher mean is happening because of the reform, but then that's kicking in over time. So you get to a new steady state. Perfect. Lastly, we can put it all together. And now you can see that when you go from year to year, you do see an effect of wages. I mean, it's not gigantic. It goes from 3.35 to 3.55, so 0.2. Why do wages matter more here than they did here, where they barely changed anything? They matter here because now they're going to further change culture. So we don't keep culture frozen. Everything is moving endogenously. I mean, everything that just in culture is moving endogenously. We have everything put, and these are our post-reform simulated moments. This is what we tried to match. This is what we tried to match. Or actually, that's not the data. That's actually what we thought. Okay, so what can we say after, what can we say after all this? So this is supposed to go nicely. So the first thing I want you to understand is basically what this model is saying is economics made very little of a difference. By economics, meaning changes in wages. That did not make much of a difference. The incentives, and you can think of that as economics too, did make a difference. Because without that reform, nothing would have changed. We were in a steady state, so nothing would have changed. So with the reform and allowing culture to change, that's when we get the important change. Now you might say, well, maybe this model is rigged so that you can't get anything that matters. You can't get economics to matter. So what we did, and I won't show it to you in terms of time, is we re-estimate the model and assume the correlation is 0.6 for everyone instead of say 0.05 to 0.09. Okay, let's give everybody a really high correlation of the number of months a woman's taken to the wage ratio. And now all the other moments remain the same, and we re-estimate the model. And then we find that wages play a major role. The reform on its own has basically no effect, and what culture does is provide an extra kick to the wages. So it's not that the model has to give you something, it's just that what the data is saying is these decisions are not being driven primarily by economics, except in terms of the reforms.
So if I take your dynamic cultural model seriously, I suppose the
Of course you do.
No, exactly. So I want to, because that isn't it true that in the reform plus all wage changes is what your model says happens in the first period when you introduce it, but culture hasn't adjusted yet. But so I guess you have kind of a multiplier from what the RDD people estimate and what you say is the true full estimate.
Yes, and that's one of the things we're revising it out, but that's one of the things we're going to compare to. I wouldn't say it's the reform plus the wage changes. I mean, yes, the wage changes in terms of levels and correlations, yes, but not the wage penalties, because those take time to happen. But you're right that we should put that in and see, and we were doing it, but actually we're doing it without the changes in wages, and we should put the changes in wages in as well, but not the change in wage penalties. Yes, so we could compare it to an RDD. We did the RDD. And the RDD does not give, if you take literally our amount of time, it does not give you robust results depending on how large that polynomial is. And the people who are able to get important results are the people who take 8. So there is a paper that does it, an RDD for this, but they look at parental leave over 8 years, which is not what we're doing. So we want something that's comparable. We're still going to do it. We're going to do it with the linear and report it and not try to make a causal.
Yep.
But I
think
agree.
you know, that-
I agree with you 100%.
I think RDD is just a bad design for this because.
Exactly. No, and I think
It's
you're,
nice to make it, I think, explicit.
thank you. Yes, yes. I don't know if you understand what he's saying, but what he's saying is a great point. Yeah. And we're already doing it. So, yeah, we are doing it. Okay, I have very few minutes. One, so I'm just going to briefly just summarize what else we've done. Okay. So, you know, there's a gender wage cap. What we do, and you can have different exercises, what we do is we give women the same distribution of wages as men, as men in their household type. So a university woman gets a university men's household, whatever, wage distribution, a non-university woman gets, if she's married to a non-university man, gets his. And if it's a mixed couple, they get their partners, okay? Mixed in terms of education. And then we ask, well, does the gender wage gap, and I'm not going to take you through it, does the gender wage gap matter? Would it make much of a difference? The answer is no. Whether you allow culture to change or not, let's only talk about allowing culture to change. It wouldn't make much of a difference. So we start in the post period, we solve for a new steady state with this new wage distribution, and it doesn't make much of a difference to anyone except for you men. You men, meaning university men married to university women, do react, and you can see this by the fact that their share goes from 30% to 43%. Whereas if you compare any other ones, you see very little change in the share done by men. Let's just take that as a summary statistic. Childcare costs. You might think, well, childcare costs could be really important. Let's subsidize childcare in the first year of life. And, you know, not just afterwards. So you put it to the same level, very low level, that you have after your child turns 1 year old. Summary, makes no difference. That's not what people care about. So you could really subsidize childcare. You would not see much of a change in what men and women are doing. What does make a difference, not surprisingly, is to give people an endowment. You can endow each parent with 6 months of non-transferable. So a man has 6, a woman has 6, you want to keep it at 13. So there's 1 month that they're free to dispose of as they wish. This is not science fiction. This is what Iceland and Finland are doing. So this is their policy. I don't know about that 1 month freely allocated, but 6 months endowment for each. That is what they're doing. And then, and there's another more drastic policy, but let me not dwell over that, given that my time is up. And those, if you do put this endowment policy and you allow culture to change, you see really large increases in men's share. If you don't allow culture to change, yes, you see increases, that's this line. But even though you've put this fairly draconian policy in which each person has 6 months, you still don't see as large increases. So you really need culture to change in order for that to happen. You should take all of this with a grain of sand, because what we're doing, of course, is really a local kind of exercise. We're going from, you know, 1 daddy month to 2 daddy months. So it's a bit of a stretch to talk about what would happen at 6 daddy months, just like it is when you do an OLS and you start talking about things that are really far away from your mean. Okay, same thing here. So let me accept that it's not linear, it actually goes to a model. Let me just conclude. So why are we interested in this? Well, first of all, countries are interested in it. They are interested. So we're interested because they're interested. There's now an EU directive, number 19, that tells people you have to endow people, men and women, with at least 2 months each. So they are going to, they do want to get gender equality in parental leave. Why, you might ask, why do they care about this? Well, we saw that there could be spillovers. Men might also demand jobs with greater flexibility when they become more involved with children. Women are going to feel less of a burden from care work. This could change occupational structures. It could decrease women's demand for flexible jobs. Under either channel, you would think that the gender wage gap would react favorably to that. And furthermore, as some of the literature has shown, this would be likely to have even more positive spillovers to the next generation. Okay.